And so they were like, their voices were going up and down in volume, but they were clearly saying that they just like seen these three bodies, and they seen like Sasquatch footprints at the murder scene, and they knew it wasn't a ripoff. They were saying because, it was all the weed had been harvested, but it was still there. Like some plants had been torn up and thrown around, right? But the bud was still there.
Deep in the remote wilderness of Oklahoma, the small community of Honobia had always been surrounded by eerie tales of Bigfoot sightings. For years, stories of strange creatures lurking in the forests had haunted the area, but nothing could have prepared the Humphrey family for the nightmare they were about to endure. In January of 1999, two brothers, Tim and Mike Humphrey, along with their families, moved to a secluded farmhouse just outside of Honobia. What began as a peaceful life in the woods soon spiraled into terror. Strange howls echoed through the trees at night. Shadowy figures stalked the property. And by the fall of 1999, the events escalated into a full-blown siege. The farm, once a sanctuary, became ground zero for an unrelenting nightmare. As the creatures drew closer, the brothers realized they were being hunted. This is the chilling story of the Siege of Honobia, a terrifying chapter of Bigfoot lore that has never been forgotten.
When the BFRO was contacted, what did the family say was occurring at the property?
They were harassing the family. They were beating on the walls. They had gotten into a freezer and taken some frozen venison.
They heard this racket, and they come outside, and it was several of these big feet. They shot one of them, and the other ones picked it up and carried it off and took it with them.
The quiet before the storm, early signs of trouble. Before the full-scale terror of the siege began, the Humphrey family was no stranger to oddities. They had heard the howls, deep, guttural sounds echoing through the forests. The occasional glimpse of a shadow or figure in the woods had raised suspicions, but these were easily dismissed as the tricks of the mind or misidentified wildlife. Yet, something shifted. In late 1999, the incidents started to escalate, slowly at first, then rapidly. The first sign that something wasn't right came when the family found that 5 deer carcasses had mysteriously disappeared from a shed on the property. There were no signs of a vehicle or human footprints. Poachers didn't make sense. There was no sign of a truck. How could 5 deer simply vanish? It seemed impossible, but that was just the beginning. Over the course of the next few weeks, more animals began to vanish. First, it was chickens, almost more than 30, disappearing from their coops without a trace. Strange, isn't it? An animal thief that could stealthily raid a farm without leaving a single clue? The growing threat, no safe place. Tim and Mike Humphrey thought they had taken a step toward securing their home when they installed the light barriers around their property. But in truth, they had just set the stage for something far darker, something they couldn't even begin to understand. Just days after the lights flickered to life, the disturbances took a terrifying turn. It started innocently enough, just a loud banging at the front door in the middle of the night. Tim, bleary-eyed, rushed to the door, expecting perhaps a prank or a strange animal. But when he swung it open, there was nothing, just the cold, empty darkness. No one in sight. He tried to brush it off as a bad dream, but the pounding came again the next night, and the next. What could it be? The wind? The house settling? Or was there something out there, something far more sinister, testing the boundaries of their sanity? Each night, the relentless hammering seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it was warning them that they were not alone. And then the shadows started moving. The children began to report strange figures lurking at the tree line, staring into the windows of the farmhouse with cold, unblinking eyes. Were these just tricks of the mind? Or were they seeing something the adults refused to acknowledge? The dogs refused to venture into certain parts of the property, cowering at the edges of the woods. This wasn't the behavior of dogs spooked by a common predator. They were sensing something far more terrifying, something the family could not see. The feeling of being watched settled over the Humphreys like a suffocating fog. No matter how many lights they installed, no matter how many locks they added to their doors, it was clear this was not just a predator trying to invade their space. It was something much darker, something that wanted them to know it was out there, always just beyond the safety of the light. And soon they would learn. The safety they thought they had was an illusion.
This guy down the road, he swears up and down that he shot one. You know, he actually shot at it. And because it was throwing rocks and gravel and stuff against his house and scaring his kids and all of this stuff.
The first real danger, a disappearance and a warning. The fear had been building for weeks now. It started with strange noises in the night, shadows at the edge of the forest, and animals disappearing. But nothing had prepared the Humphreys for the chilling event that would follow. It was the kind of thing that makes your stomach twist, the kind of thing that makes you question if your worst nightmares are real. An elderly woman in her 60s from a nearby community disappeared without a trace. One moment, she was there, the next, gone. There were no signs of struggle, no clues. The police searched for weeks, combing the area, interviewing anyone who might have seen something, but she was never found. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The family had already been living in a state of unease. Could there be a connection between the woman's disappearance and what had been happening on their land? The thought gnawed at them. The strange occurrences, the shadows, the rocks. Then, the rocks began falling. It started small, just a single rock hitting the roof with a dull thud. They dismissed it at first. Maybe it was an animal, maybe the wind, or just some random coincidence. But then, the rocks kept coming. First, it was one, then two. Then they started hitting the walls with a force that rattled the house. The family was no longer sure if they were imagining things. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't just a nuisance. It was deliberate. It was as if something, or someone, was targeting them. They tried to ignore it. They tried to pretend it wasn't happening, but every night it grew worse. The family couldn't escape it, couldn't ignore it, and they could no longer pretend it was just bad luck or a freak accident. The fear crept in, as thick and heavy as the darkness surrounding them. They couldn't sleep. Every noise made them jump. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside sent their hearts racing. Something was out there. Something was watching them, and it wasn't going to stop. The descent into horror, the monster at the window. But the worst was yet to come. The air had grown thick with fear, but nothing could have prepared the Humphreys for the terror that was about to invade their very home. It started one quiet night when the 3-year-old daughter screamed, a scream so raw, so filled with panic, it froze the blood in the parents' veins. Tim and Mike rushed to her room, hearts pounding, their minds racing with fear. Through her sobs, the little girl could barely get the words out. "A big, ugly gorilla," she said, her eyes wide with terror. "It was looking at me through the window." Her small voice trembled as she recounted the creature that had stood just outside her room, its eyes locked onto hers. The sheer horror on her face told them everything. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. But the nightmare wasn't over. Not long after, one of the mothers saw it for herself. She had tried to shake off the fear, to convince herself that the child's imagination had run wild. But when she looked out that same window, there it was, just like the child had described. A massive ape-like creature, standing in the yard. Its eyes glowed with an unearthly intensity. The creature stood still, watching, unblinking, as if it knew they were there, as if it was waiting for something. But what? The question hung in the air like a dark omen, its answer still out of reach. The family was in a state of panic. What had started as strange noises and missing animals had escalated into something unthinkable. They were no longer facing an unseen terror. No, now they had seen it with their own eyes. As the days passed, the tension grew unbearable. The family realized that their farm, their home, was no longer a safe place. It had become a battlefield, a siege. The creatures, whatever they were closing in. The family couldn't stay. The women and children had to leave, seeking shelter in a nearby community. There was no choice. Their safety was at risk, and they knew it. But the men, Tim and Mike, stayed behind. They couldn't leave. They had to defend their property, their land, even if it meant facing whatever horrors lurked in the woods. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The nightmare was far from over, and it was about to get much worse. The attack, a stalked family. The sun was barely starting to dip behind the trees when Tim's sister arrived at the farm that afternoon. She had come to visit, bringing her 2 young children along for what should have been a peaceful, ordinary trip to the remote property. But from the moment she stepped out of the car, everything changed. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, a low vibration that sent a shiver up her spine. She paused, trying to make sense of the strange feeling. But before she could react, the bushes near the gate began to rustle violently. And then, out of the shadows, they emerged. 3 massive, hairy figures stepped into the open. Their eyes gleamed with an unsettling, almost predatory focus. They weren't just curious about the woman and her children. They were a threat. Their growls echoed through the air, deep and menacing. This wasn't some wild animal or an unidentifiable creature. No, these beings were deliberate in their actions, closing in with an unnatural calmness. Fear hit her like a tidal wave. She didn't have to think. Instinct kicked in. She grabbed her kids and fled toward the house, her heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her throat. Every step felt like it might be her last. When they reached the safety of the farmhouse, she could barely catch her breath, still in shock from what had just transpired. Her words came out in fragments, too stunned to form complete sentences. "Monsters," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "There were monsters." Her children, equally shaken, clung to her, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. Tim and Mike heard the commotion and rushed to the house, immediately grabbing their assault rifles. The fear in their sister's eyes told them everything they needed to know. The nightmare had just turned into something far too real. The brothers stormed out of the house, rifles raised, their minds racing, their hearts on edge. They knew the woods like the back of their hands, but now they were stepping into the unknown, hunting for creatures they couldn't even begin to understand. They searched the property, calling out into the woods, their footsteps crunching over the fallen leaves. But the creatures were gone. No trace, no sign of their presence. It was as if they had vanished into the forest without a sound. The terror, however, was still there, lingering like a shadow. They couldn't ignore what had just happened. The creatures were real, and they weren't just hiding in the woods. They were hunting. The family had been stalked. What did those creatures want? A second attack. More creatures, more fear. The feeling of dread was already thick in the air. The Humphreys had just begun to think that maybe, just maybe, the terror from the past weeks had started to subside. But they were wrong. So terribly wrong. It happened again. It was a seemingly ordinary afternoon when Tim's niece went out to the gate. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows over the property. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She had been outside before, without incident. But this time, something was different. She felt it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a primal sense of fear that crept over her like a cold wave. The ground felt wrong beneath her feet. Her breath quickened. She wasn't alone. From the shadows of the trees, they emerged again. 3 massive, hulking shapes. There was no mistaking it. These were the same creatures, the same terrifying figures that had stalked the family weeks before. Their eyes gleamed with that same cold, predatory hunger, and their growls were louder, more menacing than before. The niece's heart raced, panic seizing her as the creatures slowly began to close in. They didn't hesitate. They didn't falter. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment. The fear overwhelmed her. She turned and ran back to the house, stumbling over her own feet, her heart hammering in her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she pounded on the door, barely able to catch her breath. "Monsters!" she cried, trembling uncontrollably. "They're going to attack me!" The words barely escaped her lips, but the terror in her eyes spoke volumes. Tim and Mike, who had been inside, heard her frantic cries. Without thinking, they grabbed their rifles and rushed outside, adrenaline flooding their veins. They had heard the stories before, but this was real. The creatures had returned. But as they fired shots into the trees, hoping to drive the monsters away, the silence that followed was deafening. There was no sound of movement, no rustle of leaves, no growls. The creatures were gone, or so it seemed. The brothers searched the surrounding woods with a sense of urgency, their rifles raised, eyes darting from tree to tree. They combed every inch of the property, hoping to find some trace of the creatures, anything to confirm what they had just been told. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of life. The woods were eerily silent, but something was different this time. The creatures hadn't just been hiding. They hadn't been trying to sneak around. They had been bold, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the brothers realized they were out of time. The creatures were no longer waiting for darkness to fall. They were making their move in the light of day, and the Humphreys were caught in the crosshairs, the shootout, fighting for survival. The evening had descended quietly, the world outside bathed in the dim glow of dusk, when the unimaginable happened. Tim and Mike sat in the safety of their home, a brief moment of peace in an otherwise chaotic nightmare. But that peace was shattered in an instant. Through the window, a figure appeared. At first it was just a shadow. Then it came into view, standing tall and unnatural. A creature, monstrous in size, with dark eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. It stood motionless, staring into the house with an intensity that sent a cold shiver down their spines. Tim's heart pounded in his chest. The creature they had feared, the one they had only heard about. This time, it was real. Without hesitation, Tim grabbed his rifle. His hands shook, but his resolve was unyielding. He stormed out of the house, heart racing, aiming his sights on the beast. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, echoing through the night. He'd hit it. There was no mistaking it. The creature stumbled, then collapsed to the ground. For a moment, there was silence. The creature was down, or so they thought. But as Tim and Mike approached, hoping to confirm the kill, something terrifying happened. The creature, wounded, bloodied, and seemingly knocked unconscious, didn't stay down. It staggered back to its feet, almost defying the laws of nature. Without hesitation, it sprinted toward the cover of the trees, its massive form disappearing into the shadows of the woods. But it wasn't alone. From the tree line, more creatures emerged. 5, 6, maybe more. They came crashing out of the forest, their growls echoing through the air like a battle cry. The brothers were surrounded. Panic surged through their veins. What had started as one creature now turned into a full-scale assault. The creatures circled the house, screaming in guttural primal rage. Then the rocks began to fall. Large, heavy stones were hurled at the brothers from all directions, slamming into the house with terrifying force. The walls shook with impact, and the windows shattered into 1,000 pieces. Tim and Mike fired back, but they were outnumbered. With each shot, it seemed like more creatures appeared, emerging from the darkness of the forest like something out of a waking nightmare. The creatures didn't stop. They kept throwing rocks, their aim precise and relentless. The brothers could hear the creatures screaming, charging the house, their rage building with every passing second. The air was thick with tension, filled with the sounds of gunfire and the deafening crashes of stone against wood. It was a nightmare come to life. The hours dragged on, the sound of the gunshots becoming a constant, haunting rhythm. Tim and Mike fought back, defending their home with everything they had, but it felt like they were losing ground. The creatures were relentless, and the house seemed to shrink around them with every passing moment. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the creatures began to retreat. Their figures faded into the shadows of the woods, disappearing as silently as they had come. The brothers were left in the aftermath, breathless, battered, and broken. The terror was over, for now, but the damage had been done. The house was in ruins, the once safe walls now scarred with the marks of the creature's assault. But even as the morning light broke through the trees, the brothers knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The creatures had shown no mercy, and they would be back. The siege of the Humphrey farm had only just begun. The aftermath, fleeing in the night. The morning after the shootout, the Humphrey brothers woke to a silence that seemed more unsettling than any noise they had heard the night before. The house was still standing, but the remnants of the night's battle were everywhere. Bloodstains marked the ground where the creature had fallen, dark, jagged splotches against the dirt, evidence of the violence that had unfolded only hours earlier. But the true horror hit when they heard from a nearby logger who had witnessed something they could hardly believe. The man claimed he had seen two of the Bigfoot creatures carrying a third, one of their own, badly wounded or possibly dead, through the forest. The realization struck them with a brutal clarity. These creatures weren't just some wild animal. They were organized. They were capable of caring for each other, and they were out for blood. The terror that had plagued the family seemed to have no end. It was as if they had been marked by creatures that refused to be ignored. As much as they tried to move forward, the haunting reminder of the violence they had endured was everywhere. Then came the visits. At first, it was subtle. A knock at the door, a stranger asking questions. Then, the visits became more frequent, more intense. Men in suits appeared. They claimed to be government agents, asking for information about the events on the property. The brothers, already on edge, grew suspicious. Who were these people? Why did they care so much about the creatures? About what had happened on the farm? Then, strange things started happening. Their phones began acting up. Calls dropped inexplicably. Messages went missing. And sometimes the phones would pick up strange static, distorted voices, like someone listening in. The brothers suspected they were being watched, monitored by forces beyond their understanding. The paranoia grew with every passing day. They couldn't escape the feeling that the walls were closing in on them. The creatures had come for them. And now, it felt like someone else was watching, waiting. But who? And why? The sense of impending danger became unbearable. In the dead of night, the brothers made a decision. They could no longer stay. The fear, the constant surveillance, the creatures, they couldn't live like this any longer. It was time to leave, so they packed up what they could, hurriedly stuffing clothes into bags, leaving behind the things they had spent years building and simply vanished, never to be heard from again. The house, once a symbol of their hard work and safety, was now just another empty shell, abandoned and forgotten. The creatures had already marked it as their territory, and now it seemed that the brothers had become ghosts. The legend lives on, a story that won't die. The siege of Honobia is one of the most chilling Bigfoot encounters on record. What makes this story so compelling is the sheer level of aggression and violence exhibited by the creatures. The multiple witnesses and the unexplained disappearances make it hard to dismiss as mere folklore. Something happened on that farm. Something terrifying, and the Humphreys are gone, leaving behind only their harrowing tale. So what do you think? Could this really have been a clan of Bigfoots attacking a family for months? Or is there something even more sinister at play here?
Yellow River State Forest has been incredible. We had so much intel on this area from the Iowa BFRO, plus we were able to examine the evidence they had gathered on previous expeditions. Just in the time we've been here,
Hear that?
yeah, we've had action on every night we've gone out.
Matt Moneymaker and his team thought they had Bigfoot cornered in the depths of the Alaskan wilderness. But just when they were about to make history, everything took a turn they never saw coming. A hotspot of mystery. The team had gathered every piece of information they could on this location. Thanks to intel from the Iowa Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, BFRO, they weren't going in blind. They had evidence from previous expeditions, first-hand accounts, and strange recordings. Every night they ventured out, something happened. Sounds, movement, disturbances in the dark. Yellow River State Forest in Iowa wasn't just any forest. It was a place where the ordinary collided with the unexplainable. And on this night, everything was about to escalate. Days of investigation had led to one final night, one last shot at uncovering the truth. They had been hearing rustling sounds, but not from deer, not from raccoons, something else, something that moved with purpose. There had been glimpses, flashes of movement between the trees, but never clear enough to be certain. But one thing was undeniable. Something was out there.
Listening to this vocalization, it's pretty eerie, but just to uniformly say, that's a squatch.
Sitting around the campfire, the team pored over everything they had experienced so far. Too many strange occurrences had piled up for it all to be a coincidence. It was time to make a move. They decided to return to the location of their first major encounter, the place where they felt something watching them from the shadows. A place that seemed to pull in the local wildlife, almost as if they too sensed something was off. The final investigation. When an area becomes a magnet for wildlife, it's usually a sign of something lurking, something that doesn't belong. And in a forest as untamed as Yellow River, that sign couldn't be ignored. Matt and his team geared up, ready to head back into the depths for one last chance at making contact. The air was thick with anticipation. Was this finally the moment they would come face to face with the creature they had been tracking? Or was something else waiting for them in the dark? The deeper they went, the more the weight of the unknown pressed down on them. One last push, one last investigation. And then, everything changed. After days of searching and piecing together fragments of evidence, it was all about to end in this moment. There was no turning back now. The forest didn't give up its secrets easily, but tonight could be different.
And Cliff and I are going to be a ground team. We're going to be moving around the edge of a big field near whereby both Cliff and Bobo said they've gotten possible activity.
The team was a diverse group of experts. The success of any investigation, especially one as unpredictable as a Sasquatch hunt, lay not only in the equipment used, but in the people behind the mission. In this case, the team assembled for this expedition was a carefully selected mix of expertise, experience, and resourcefulness, each bringing their unique strengths to the table. At the helm of one part of the investigation were Eric and his daughter Andrea. They had a vehicle equipped with a thermal camera mounted on top, giving them a crucial advantage. Rene was with them, assisting as they patrolled up and down the road, scanning the forest from an aerial perspective. The thermal camera allowed them to detect anything that might be hiding just beyond the reach of human eyes. It was a strategy designed to cover vast expanses of the forest, providing a top-down view of the shadows where even the most experienced researchers might miss something critical. The vehicle's mobility added another layer of flexibility. They could scan the surrounding fields and woods with ease, maximizing their ability to cover large areas quickly. More importantly, the thermal camera wasn't just a tool for tracking heat signatures from animals. It could pick up on anything with a significant body temperature, which was crucial when trying to spot something like Sasquatch. If something large and warm was moving in the woods, they wouldn't miss it. Meanwhile, on the ground, Matt, Bobo, and Cliff navigated the dense forest, moving with precision and care. They weren't just walking, they were hunting for signs. Near the edge of a large field, where Sasquatch activity had been previously concentrated, they stayed alert. The team knew the creature was elusive and thrived in these remote, quiet places full of hidden corners. It was all about patience and precision. A single misstep could mean losing the creature, or worse, missing crucial evidence. Then, a sound, clear, unmistakable. A large branch snapped. "Did you hear that?" Matt whispered. "That wasn't us." The tension thickened. The forest, usually filled with the hum of insects and distant animal calls, felt eerily silent, and they weren't alone. Additional BFRO members had positioned themselves at strategic locations, listening, watching, waiting. They were ready to guide the team if anything or anyone made a move in the darkness. And then, something did. Something watches from the dark. The BFRO members stationed throughout the area played a key role in what was about to unfold. They weren't just sitting quietly, they were actively listening for any unusual sounds, movement in the underbrush, strange vocalizations in the distance. Their task was to alert Matt's team to anything out of the ordinary. If Sasquatch was nearby, there was a good chance one of them would pick up on something that the rest of the team might miss.
It almost sounded like a pig.
Bob, did you hear a squealing noise over by the road?
I sure so did. It was right behind me. Over.
What did it sound like to you?
Monkey chatter. Over.
The entire setup was a delicate balance of high-tech tools and the instinctive knowledge of experienced researchers. The thermal scanning from above, combined with the ground team's attentiveness, created a comprehensive approach to tracking down Sasquatch. Every angle was covered, every possibility accounted for. And as it often happens with these kinds of investigations, what they didn't anticipate was exactly what unfolded next. The forest had its own plans. Sometimes it doesn't matter how prepared you are, nature takes control. What happened next was a moment that even the most seasoned investigators could not have foreseen. The first signs of movement. The night was just beginning, and already the forest had begun to reveal its secrets. The first signs of movement. Something was watching. As the team quietly slipped into position, the atmosphere in the forest seemed to thicken. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig was amplified under the heavy anticipation. Tension built with each step as they moved deeper into the heart of the woods. The night felt charged, like something was watching, waiting for them to make the first move. There was a sense of being observed, a feeling that they were not alone in this vast wilderness.
Oh, did you hear that? What is that?
What was that squealing noise I just heard?
It almost sounded like a pig.
Then it happened. A strange noise, sharp and abrupt, cut through the stillness. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. It didn't sound like a deer brushing past the underbrush, nor was it the soft fluttering of a bird taking flight. This sound was different, unfamiliar, unsettling. The team froze. For a moment, everything stopped. Matt listened intently. He could hear shifting in the brush. Something was definitely moving, something bigger than the usual suspects. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It was hard to ignore the growing sense that this wasn't just an ordinary noise. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. A brief disturbance, then silence. Was it the wind? A trick of the mind? In the vast dark expanse of the forest, it was easy to second-guess yourself. But deep down, the team knew better. Their instincts were firing, telling them this was no mere coincidence. And that's when the real encounter began. The red glow in the darkness. The team saw an eerie red light flickering between the trees. It wasn't natural. There was no logical source for it in the middle of the forest. It pulsed faintly, appearing and disappearing as if something was moving in front of it, blocking the glow at irregular intervals. It wasn't a campfire, nor the distant shine of headlights from a passing car. This was different. A heavy silence settled over the area. The usual sounds of the forest had faded away, leaving only the soft rustling of unseen movement in the undergrowth.
Stop. We heard something.
The sensation of being watched was stronger than ever, an invisible presence lurking just beyond sight. The team's instincts screamed that whatever was out there wasn't an ordinary animal. They took cautious steps forward, their breath slow and measured. The light remained in sight for a few moments longer, until suddenly it vanished.
There it is again. It poked up.
The absence of the red glow left an unsettling emptiness in the darkness. The team scanned the area, straining to catch any sign of movement. The trees stood still, the shadows stretching endlessly into the void. There was no wind, no stirring leaves, no sound beyond their own footsteps. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, the noise returned. A sharp, high-pitched squeal cut through the silence, closer this time. It was unmistakably the sound of a distressed piglet, yet something about it felt wrong. It didn't waver or fluctuate like a natural animal call. It was too deliberate, too precise, a near-perfect imitation. Another squeal followed, then another, overlapping in an unnatural rhythm. The sound bounced through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the exact direction. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, an unseen presence. A wave of unease settled over the team. This was no ordinary animal. The sounds were calculated, almost as if they were being used as a tool, a lure, a trick, or perhaps even a warning. The forest, once simply mysterious, now felt completely alien. Then came the movement, not the light shuffle of a deer in the underbrush or the skittering of a raccoon through the leaves. This was something heavier, deliberate, moving with purpose. The undergrowth shifted, branches cracking softly as something unseen adjusted its position. It was close, closer than before. The team moved forward, their senses heightened. Whatever had made the sound was out there, waiting in the darkness, watching, testing them. The deeper they pushed into the trees, the stronger the feeling became. Something was leading them somewhere, and for the first time, the team wasn't sure if they were the ones doing the hunting or if they were the ones being hunted.
Ooh. Did you hear that?
No, I was sliding one.
As the team struggled to process the unsettling squeal, their focus was suddenly pulled in a different direction. Off in the distance, a faint red light flickered through the trees. At first, it was barely noticeable, a dim glow weaving between the branches, but it moved. Slowly, deliberately, the pulsing light faded in and out of sight, as if whatever held it knew it was being watched. It wasn't random. It wasn't the wandering beam of a flashlight or the faint glow of distant campfires. The rhythm of its movement was unsettling, too smooth, too controlled. 100 possibilities ran through Matt's mind. Was it another investigator, a lost hiker, a member of the team who had wandered too far? But none of them carried red lights, and they had been careful to track each other's positions. They would have known if someone was moving out there. His pulse quickened. This wasn't an accident. Something was off. The red light drifted along the edge of the field, its path precise yet unnatural. It wasn't bobbing like a headlamp worn by someone walking. It glided, its movement intentional. It never hesitated, never faltered, as though it had a purpose all its own. Bobo, positioned closest to it, confirmed what Matt already suspected. No one from their group was responsible. The realization settled over them like a weight, deepening the mystery. If it wasn't one of theirs, then who or what was out there? The light continued its steady course, casting an eerie red glow against the tree trunks. The forest around them held its breath, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it stopped. Silence followed. Thick, heavy, unnatural. And that's when Matt saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, motionless, barely visible against the shadows. It was tall, too tall. The proportions were off. Something about its stance, its stillness, felt wrong. It didn't shift its weight like a person would. It didn't sway in the breeze. It just stood there, watching. It wasn't just the height that sent a chill through him. It was the way it seemed deliberate, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. The chase through the woods. Cliff's gaze followed the direction Matt was staring. Across the field, right where the red light had been, a human-like figure crouched near the tree line, motionless, yet unmistakably present. The figure shifted. Subtle at first, but enough to be seen. It was no longer hidden behind the tree. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped out. The shape was undeniable now, tall, bipedal, and moving with an eerie precision. Then, the realization hit like a thunderclap. This wasn't just any figure lurking in the woods. This was what they had been searching for. The strange noises, the flickering red light, the figure hiding in the shadows, it all made sense now. A Sasquatch.
Side of a periodic worm tree or some of the hot gravel? Haven't seen anything yet. I mean, give me a chipmunk or something.
Matt's breath caught in his throat. The sheer enormity of the moment overwhelmed him. There it was, standing before them. The creature that had eluded countless hunters, skeptics, and believers for years. It had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And now, that moment had come. The team barely had time to react before it moved. "It's walking off, on 2 legs." The words were barely out before instinct kicked in. The chase was on. Matt, Bobo, and Cliff moved forward, their adrenaline spiking as they sprinted toward the tree line. No more questions. No more doubts. This was real. And they weren't about to let it disappear without a fight. The forest swallowed them whole as they tore through the dense underbrush, branches snapping underfoot, leaves whipping against their faces. The night was alive with movement, their hurried footsteps crashing through the foliage, but the Sasquatch, experienced, elusive, moved with a different kind of mastery. It knew the land. It used the trees, the brush, the very shadows to its advantage. It was fast, too fast, weaving in and out of sight with an ease that defied belief. Every second it gained more distance, slipping further into the labyrinth of the wilderness. The team pressed on, lungs burning, muscles straining, but deep down, a sinking realization began to creep in. They were chasing something built for this terrain, something that had survived unseen for generations. And just like that, the figure melted into the darkness.
Look across the field where I'm looking. There's a human-like figure that we just had a red light from over there.
Yeah, by the tree, right?
Yeah, and that thing's sitting there watching us, and it's crouching down.
The pursuit intensifies. Matt led the charge, his heart hammering in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pounding of his pulse echoed in his ears, drowning out the rustling leaves and snapping branches beneath their feet. The chase had reached a fever pitch. The Sasquatch was close, agonizingly close, but it was also moments away from slipping into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. For a brief moment, the adrenaline kept their spirits soaring. They were pushing forward relentlessly, never looking back, their focus locked into the only thing that mattered. The creature was within reach. This was it. This was their chance. But then, something changed. The Sasquatch, which had seemed almost cornered, began to retreat, not in a panicked scramble, but with a steady, deliberate pace. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable. Then it picked up speed, pulling farther and farther into the thick woods. The team was running full tilt, yet the distance between them and their target was only growing. Matt barely had time to register the shift before Bobo called out, saying he's flanking to the right. The plan was simple: cut off its path, box it in, give them the chance they needed to finally capture undeniable proof. But the creature was already moving with uncanny precision, weaving through the trees like a ghost. Then they saw it again. Frustration surged through Matt. Hours of tracking, of chasing, of coming so close, only to watch their chance slip through their fingers again. The Sasquatch wasn't just fast, it was evasive in a way that defied belief. Every time they thought they had it, it adjusted, shifting its course, vanishing just before they could close the distance. It wasn't running in blind panic. It was calculating every step. This was no ordinary animal. The team pushed harder, forcing their legs to move faster, their bodies to endure the strain. But no matter how much ground they covered, the creature always seemed to be just out of reach. The gap between them would shrink, a glimpse of its towering form flashing between the trees, only for it to slip away again. This was the moment. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, it all hinged on what happened next. If they lost it now, this could be the end. Years of searching, of endless nights in the wilderness, of chasing something that always remained just beyond their grasp. The Sasquatch was right there, so close. One more break, one more chance. If they could just push a little harder, just get one step closer, they might finally capture the evidence they had been dreaming of for years. A frustrating misstep. The chase had reached its breaking point. The adrenaline, the tension, the hope. It had all built up to this moment. But in an instant, the excitement gave way to something far more crushing. A false alarm. The forest fell into an eerie silence as the realization set in. The Sasquatch was gone. The thrill of pursuit had been replaced by the bitter sting of disappointment. Just as Matt prepared to process the loss, something caught his eye. A faint red light, barely visible in the vast darkness, flickered in the distance. It was subtle at first, almost easy to miss, but then it moved, slowly, deliberately. His mind raced. Was the creature still nearby? Was this some sign, some strange behavior they had yet to understand? Or was it something else entirely? The rest of the team came to a halt, eyes locked on the glow. The stillness was suffocating. Then, the red light shifted again. Only this time, it was closer. Too close. Matt's pulse quickened, but not from excitement. There was something wrong. Then the truth hit him. Bobo. The realization sank like a stone in his gut. Bobo had broken away from the group, following the same red light they had seen earlier, investigating it on his own. And in doing so, he had unknowingly led them astray.
I asked if anybody had turned on a red headlamp over here. We saw a red headlamp in this direction, that's why I came here.
Frustration burned in Matt's chest. The team had been seconds away from something huge, something undeniable. Every clue, every noise, every shadow had pointed them toward this one chance. And now, because of a simple miscommunication, they had been thrown off course.
This is the most frustrated I've been while squatching in a long time. We've now done enough to draw attention to ourselves that anything that is out here would have decided whether it's going to continue to approach or walk around us or back off.
Bobo, oblivious to the chaos he had just caused, reappeared, confirming what Matt already knew. He had seen the red light and, without telling anyone, had gone to check it out himself. The team exchanged looks, the weight of disappointment heavy in the air. They had spent days in the wilderness, gathering evidence, chasing leads, pushing themselves to the limit. They had been so close. This was supposed to be the moment they proved to the world that Sasquatch was real. And now, all they were left with was a mistake that could cost them everything. Matt clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay focused. They couldn't let this slip through their fingers, not after coming this close. The Sasquatch was still out there, and every second wasted made their chances of finding it again even slimmer. He exhaled sharply, gripping his flashlight. When he finally switched it on, the beam cut through the darkness, landing directly on the culprit, Bob. There he stood, explaining how he too had seen the red light and had wandered off to investigate. Matt swallowed his irritation. There was no point dwelling on it now. The night had been a whirlwind of tension, adrenaline, and fleeting hope. But now, as the team regrouped at their base, the atmosphere had shifted. The once lively forest had fallen into an unsettling silence. No rustling leaves, no distant footsteps, just an eerie stillness, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The team sat in quiet reflection. It had been a night of highs and lows, chasing their target, nearly catching a glimpse, only to be led astray by a well-intentioned mistake. But as Matt processed everything, one thing became clear. This hadn't been a failure. He had spent enough time in the wilderness to know that sometimes the most significant moments happen in the quiet after the chaos. The signs were undeniable, the strange vocalizations, the glimpses of movement, the unusual readings. They weren't chasing shadows. Something had been out there, watching, maybe even testing them. As they packed up, one truth settled in. Yellow River State Forest wasn't just another stop on their journey. It was a hotspot, a place where Sasquatch could very well be lurking. Most wouldn't think of Iowa as prime Bigfoot territory, but the evidence told a different story. Despite the setbacks, despite the near misses, Matt couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. This, he thought to himself, might just be the luckiest day of my career.